Ladies and gentlemen, namaskar. Welcome to the 16th edition of the Jaipur Literature Festival, protected by Dettol, Banega Swasth India at the Hawthornden Foundation mobile tent. We are delighted to introduce Translating Words, Translating Worlds. This session is presented by the British Council. As a part of India-UK Season of Culture, a vibrant panel of writers, poets, translators, and podcasters come together to discuss the multiple layers of words and language, meaning and interpretation, and the sources of their inspirations. Juri Baruah is currently pursuing her PhD from TISS Guwahati campus and working as an assistant professor of geography at DCB Girls College. She has published 2 short story collections, and her stories are translated to English and Hindi and Bengali. Garfield Dsouza is a writer, editor, and podcaster. His poems are in Language is a Queer Thing, an anthology by the British Council, the Queer Muslim Project, and Verve Poetry Press. He has designed blended e-learning courses for the Tata Group, Capgemini, and Lionbridge, and written technical documentation for IBM and Rolta. Joining us virtually is Sanah Ahsan, an award-winning poet, liberation psychologist, and educator. Their work includes delivering a TED Talk, writing for The Guardian, and presenting a Channel 4 documentary. Alison is working on a non-fiction book about liberation psychology and embracing madness. Their debut poetry collection is forthcoming with Bloomsbury in 2024-25. Deepa Bhasthi is a writer and translator working in Kannada and English. Her essays, columns, and articles on the politics of culture have been published widely in national and international publication. Preti Taneja's second book, Aftermath, won the Gordon Byrne Prize 2022 and was his New Statesman and New Yorker Book of the Year. Taneja is co-chair of the English Pen Translation Advisory Group and professor of world literature and creative writing at Newcastle University, UK. Before we start the session, I'd like to invite Alison Barrett, Country Director, British Council, up to open the session.
Thank you very much. Good evening, namaskar. Main bahut khush hu ki aap log yahan aaye hain aaj. Thank you very much for coming to our session. I know it's been a long day. So today marks the thank you very much. Today marks the celebration of the British Council's India UK Together Season of Culture, a 10-month cultural programme which brings together 1,400 artists across 40 projects and 21 cities across the country. We're really proud to be bringing new voices and new emerging writers and translators to the fore. Our work in language and literature is really important. By connecting people and ideas, literature and language, we can really understand the world around us, understand each other and ourselves better. And this is absolutely core to the work of the British Council. So this session, Translating Words, Translating Worlds, could not be more timely in the year that Geeta Anjali Shri and Daisy Rockwell won the Booker Prize, putting that UK-India relationship in the spotlight and helping us promote and support the work of new writers and translators. This session brings together 3 projects under our Season of Culture. Write Assamese, a writer development program which has been developed by Untold Narratives in the UK and B Books in Calcutta, and supports new writing and translation in the Assamese language. And it has just been published in this anthology, which we're really proud to see in the bookshop here in Jaipur. Language is a Queer Thing is a collaboration between the Verve Poetry Festival in the UK and the Queer Muslim Project in India. It gave space to poets to explore queer experience in each of their countries and to write new works which have also appeared in a new anthology. And then finally, Pen Presents, a project by English Pen, which supports and showcases new sample translations, helping diversify the translated literature landscape. This round of Pen Presents focused on the work and literature of Indian languages and Indian writers. So you've already heard Dr. Preti Taneja's introduction, but I also just want to add that as well as the prizes mentioned earlier, she also recently won the Philip Leverhulme Prize for Literature. So huge congratulations to Preti, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Alison, and thank you to all of you for coming. I'm Preti, Taneja, and I'm just delighted to be here to discuss the work of these four outstanding writers and translators. I just want to mark that with the fact it's very unusual for us to be able to sit with so much experience across languages, across Indian languages, and so it's wonderful to be able to showcase these writers and their work. So what we're going to do is we're going to hear from them each in turn, a little bit of reading from their work, and then delve into how they go about doing what they do. And I'm going to start with you, Juri, at the far end there. So Juri is she's a writer who's taken part in Write Assamese, and she is going to read for us in Assamese and English from a story called The Roar of Baghjan, translated by Harshita here, and it's in this book, A Fistful of Moonlight, which Alison showed you. Thank you, Juri.
Good evening, everyone. So, myself, Juri from Assam, from Northeast India, and I write short stories in Assamese. So, yeah, thank you. I'm thankful to British Council for giving us the opportunity to work under the project Untold Assam, which help us a lot in terms of the collaboration and the translation of Assamese short stories to English. So I'm going to read a little bit from the Assamese version of my story, which is translated to English and which is included in this collection. I'm reading it on the tribute of the greatest poet of our nation, the Gyanpith Award winner poet Nilamani Fukonn, who belonged to Assam, and he died on 19th January. So on tribute to him, I want to read a little bit from the Assamese version. The title of the story is Baghchui. It is translated as The Roar of Baghjan. তেলখাদৰ গুম গুম শব্দবোৰ ৰাতিৰ হুৰুঙালৈ ছাইটৰ পৰা বহু দূৰলৈকে বিয়পি পৰে। অন্ধকাৰৰ খাপে খাপে শব্দবোৰৰ কঁপনি এনেকৈ সোমাই যায় যেন সিহঁতৰ মাজৰ চিনাকি বহু বছৰ পুৰণি। পুৰণি বিলত উপঙি ফুৰা মাছবোৰতকৈও এই চিনাকি সিমানেই পুৰণি, যিমান পুৰণি এই মাটিৰ গাৰে পিছলি পৰা ৰ'দ, বতাহ, বৰষুণ অথবা মানুহৰ খোজৰ খমখমীয়া লিকতা দাগ। The night was like a deep forest grown old, except for the rumbling sounds from the oil field, proudly declaring their dominance. Piercing the darkness, these sounds were like a rusty knife, being twisted inside a wound, a sharp blade that spared no one. Not the fish in Maguri Lake, not the ruddy sail ducks in the Motapung wetlands, not even the pink lotuses blooming in the lake water. Thank you.
Thank you, Juri. Working in Assam, in a vast political terrain that's constantly under cultural and linguistic pressure from identity politics, citizenship issues, indigeneity, and a struggle over natural resources, what place do you think a fiction writer can occupy in such a deeply politicized landscape?
Thank you, Preti. Assam is a land of stories. If you see, the history, the geography, the culture of Assam, always linked with various layers of stories. The colonial history, which is linked with the invention of tea and oil, especially in case of Upper Assam. There are lots of stories which are related to oil fields and tea gardens. And this particular story, which is included in this collection, is also based on the incident, the fire that happens in Baghjan, the oil field, and the fire continues till 150 days, which is the longest fire in the history of oil. So this story, I'm particularly explaining this story because it gives you the glimpse how the natural environment has been changing and how natural environment also becomes a part of, the cultural and the geographical attributes of the people. So as an Assamese girl or as an Assamese woman, I feel that I born in 1990, and my family, like many other families in Assam who have the experience of the 6 years Assam movement, and later, immediately after the Assam movement, the movement of insurgency has been started. And the recent movement, if you see in case of the political history of Assam, is the Citizenship Amendment Act. So the resistance of various communities, various tribes, including the minorities, this resistance becomes a part of my short stories. And it helps me to build the idea of place. So I think that my stories are about my people and my place. And these are the simple stories like many other other stories of any parts of the world. But these are something, distinguished from the other parts of the region uh, because the historical distinction of this entire region. So that's how I feel that,
It's
yeah.
so interesting to hear you talk about how important oil is and this fire that burned for 150 days
Yeah.
that you write about in this story, something that affects all our lives from this
Yeah.
corner of the
Yeah.
world. But then the stories are going to get translated into English. So how do you meet that challenge of working with a translation as a writer,
Yeah,
trying
yeah.
to make these points? Tell
Yeah.
us about the process.
Yeah, the process is really very interesting and also challenging for us because many a times when stories or anything, translated, especially fiction, translated to a different language, it is very difficult to, carry the honesty of the source language. Uh, I'm thankful to Untold Write Assam project by British Council and BE Books, which helped me, not only me, along with other 12 writers who were present in Kaziranga, and we have been a workshop on how to, translate the stories. The translators and the writers, the authors sit together, they discuss about different, facts and how and the entire settings of the short story. So in my case, I remember that I wrote this particular story more than 8 times, so that the originality of the story is also be there, and it is also helpful to be readable for the global audience. I'm thankful to Harshita here who actually translated this story to English, and we have lots of conversations on how the original characters can be put in such a way so that the fidelity of the story can be kept in the translated version too. So yeah.
I'm going to move, thank you so much. I'm
Yeah.
going to move on now to Deepa, and who is herself a translator, but also a writer. And just picking up from the importance of being a feminist, she's the winner of the Pen Presents grant for translation from Bengali for feminist writer Banu Mushtaq. And she's going to read us a little bit from one of Banu's stories that she's translated in both languages. Thank you.
Thank you, Preti. So this is a story from, this is an excerpt from a story called Shaista Mahal na Kallu Chappadigalu, or Stone Steps for Shaista Mahal. So it's a story about this newly married couple, Zeenat and Mujahid, who become friends with an older couple named Shaista and Iftikhar. So this older couple is seemingly madly in love, and they have 6 children with a 7th child on the way. And something horribly goes wrong towards the end of the story. So this excerpt is from the first time they all meet, when Iftikhar, a 50-year-old man, is he acts like he's still a very lovelorn teenager. ಕತ್ತಲಾಗುತ್ತಾ ಬಂತು. ಹೊರಡೋಣವೆಂದುಕೊಳ್ಳುತ್ತಿದ್ದಂತೆ ಇಫ್ತಿಕಾರ್, ಝೀನತ್ ಬಾಬಿ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ನೋಡಿ, ಈ ಸೀಬೆ ಮರಗಳನ್ನು ಶಾಯಿಸ್ತಾಗೋಸ್ಕರ ನಾನೇ ನೆಟ್ಟದ್ದು. ಇಲ್ಲಿರುವ ಪ್ರತಿಯೊಂದು ಗಿಡವೂ ಹೂವು ಆಕೆಗೆ ಇಷ್ಟವಾದವು. ಈ ಅನಾಬ್ಶಾಹಿ ದ್ರಾಕ್ಷಿ ಬಳ್ಳಿಯು ಆಕೆಗಾಗಿ ನಾನೇ ಕೈಯಾರೆ ಬೆಳೆಸಿದ್ದೆ. ಈ ಉಯ್ಯಾಲೆಗಳು ಅವಳಿಗೆ ಬಹಳ ಪ್ರೀತಿ. ಇಫ್ತಿಕಾರ್ ಭಾಯ್, ನಿಮ್ಮ ಹೊಂದಾಣಿಕೆ ಕಂಡು ನನಗೆ ತುಂಬ ಸಂತೋಷವೆನಿಸುತ್ತೆ. ಭಾಬಿಯ ಇಷ್ಟನಿಷ್ಟಕ್ಕೆ ನೀವು ತುಂಬ ಪ್ರಾಮುಖ್ಯತೆ ಕೊಡುತ್ತಿದ್ದೀರಲ್ಲ. ಇಷ್ಟೇ ಅಲ್ಲ, ನಾನೇನಾದರೂ ಚಕ್ರವರ್ತಿ ವಾಗಿರುತ್ತಿದ್ದರೆ ಈ ತಾಜ್ ಮಹಲ್ ಕೂಡ ನಾಚುವಂತಹ ಅರಮನೆ ಕಟ್ಟಿಸಿ ಶಾಯಿಸ್ತಾ ಮಹಲ್ ಎನ್ನುವ. ಇದುವರೆಗಾಗಲೇ ಮಕ್ಕಳೊಡನೆ ಆಟ ನಿಲ್ಲಿಸಿ ಹತ್ತಿರ ಬಂದಿದ್ದ ಮುಜಾಹಿದ್ ತಡೆದು, ಓಹೋ ನಿಲ್ಲಿಸಿ ಇಫ್ತಿಕಾರ್, ಸದ್ಯ ನೀವೆಂಥ ಪ್ರಮಾದ ಮಾಡುತ್ತಿದ್ದೀರಿ ಎನ್ನುವುದೇ ತಿಳಿದಿಲ್ಲ. ತಾಜ್ ಮಹಲ್ ನನ್ನಾದರೂ ಸತ್ತ ಹೆಂಡತಿಯ ಗೋರಿಯನ್ನಾಗಿ ಆ ಚಕ್ರವರ್ತಿ ಕಟ್ಟಿಸಿದ. ಭಾಬಿಯಾದರೋ ಅಲ್ಲಾಹ್ ಅವರಿಗೆ ದೀರ್ಘಾಯುಷ್ಯವನ್ನು ನೀಡಲಿ, ನಿಮ್ಮೆದುರಿಗೆ ಕುಳಿತಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ನೀವಾದರೂ ಶಾಯಿಸ್ತಾ ಮಹಲ್ ಕಟ್ಟಿಸುವ ಮಾತನಾಡುತ್ತಿದ್ದೀರಿ. ಇಫ್ತಿಕಾರ್ ಒಂದು ನಿಮಿಷ ತಡವರಿಸಿದಂತೆ ಕಂಡಿತು. ಆದರೆ ತಾಜ್ ಮಹಲನ್ನು ಯಾರೂ ಗೋರಿ ಎಂದು ಭಾವಿಸುವುದಿಲ್ಲ. ಮೊಹಬ್ಬತ್ ಕಿ ನಿಶಾನಿ, ಪ್ರೇಮದ ಕುರುಹನ್ನಾಗಿ ಪರಿಗಣಿಸುತ್ತಾರೆ. ಆ ಅರ್ಥದಲ್ಲಿ ನಾನು ಹೇಳಿದ್ದು. ಮುಜಾಹಿದ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿಗೂ ಬಿಡಲಿಲ್ಲ. ಹೌದು, ಸತ್ತ ಪ್ರೇಮದ ಸಂಕೇತ. ಆದರೆ ಪ್ರೇಮ ಸಾಯುವುದಿಲ್ಲ ಮುಜಾಹಿದ್. ಹಾಂ, ಸಾಯುವುದಿಲ್ಲ. ಇದು ಫಿಲ್ಮಿ ಡೈಲಾಗ್ ಭಾಯ್. ನಿಮ್ಮ ತಾಯಿ ಸತ್ತರೆ ತಾಯಿಯ ಪ್ರೇಮವೂ ಸತ್ತಂತೆಯೇ. ಇನ್ಯಾರಿಂದಲೂ ನಿಮಗೆ ಈ ಪ್ರೀತಿ ಸಿಗುವುದಿಲ್ಲ. ಹಾಂ, ಇನ್ನು ಹೆಂಡತಿ ಸತ್ತರೆ ಅದು ಬೇರೆ ವಿಷಯ, ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ಹೆಂಡತಿ ಸಿಗುತ್ತಾಳೆ. ಮುಜಾಹಿದ್ನ ಈ ಮಾತಿನಿಂದ ನನಗೆ ಶಾಕ್ ಆದಂತಾಯಿತು. And in English, this is still a work in progress, so not a fully final polished version. It was getting dark. Just as I was thinking of leaving, Iftikhar said, Zeenat Bhabi, look here. I planted this guava tree for Shaista. Every plant and flower here is among her favorites. I grew this Anabshahi grapes creeper for her. These swings, she likes them very much. Iftikhar Bhai, I feel very happy to see you both together. You seem to pay a lot of attention to Bhabi's likes and dislikes. Not just this, if I was an emperor, I would have built a palace that would put Taj Mahal to shame and call it Shaista Mahal. Mujahid, who was playing with the children until then, came near us and stopped him mid-sentence, saying, "Oh, stop Iftikhar, you don't know what blunder you're committing. The emperor built Taj Mahal as a grave for his dead wife. May Allah give Bhabi a long life. She's sitting right in front of you. And here you are, talking about constructing a Shaista Mahal." It seemed like Iftikhar faltered for a minute. But no one thinks of the Taj Mahal as a grave. They consider it a Mohabbat ki nishani, a symbol of love. I said this in that sense. Mujahid did not let the matter go and retorted, Yes, a symbol of dead love. But love does not die, Mujahid. It doesn't. This is a filmy dialogue, bhai. If your mother dies, it is the death of your mother's love too. You will not get that kind of love from anyone else. But if the wife dies, it's a different matter, because you can always get another wife. I was shocked by what Mujahid was saying.
Thank you so much, Deepa. It's so interesting to be able to hear it in both languages. But you've spoken to me before about the invisibility of the translator and how traditionally that role has been erased. What do you think about this, and how does it need to change? How can we affect that change?
I think we were talking about this earlier as well. I think it has to come from all the parties involved, the publisher, the author, the translator. I think we really need to understand that a translator is not just substituting one word for the other. And again, we were talking about this yesterday, that translation is between two cultures. It's not just between two languages that, you find one word for another and your job is done. So when you're trying to translate a culture, the role of the translator is just as important as the original writer. So I think this has to come from everybody involved in the in the whole translation process. And
So for example,
name the translator.
Right.
Sorry, name the translator.
So what is name the translator? What does that actually mean?
So I think it started as does all hashtags these days on Twitter. I can't remember the translator. I think it was Sorry?
Jennifer.
Yes, Jenny Croft, of course. So she started this hashtag to encourage, authors to ask for their translators' names to be put on the cover, for publishers to put the name of the translator. And I think it's so important to recognize that a translator is also a writer.
Absolutely, and we could hear that just from what you were doing. And you said something about how translation is about culture as well. So when you're trying to translate culture, can you give us an example of where you've struggled with that?
Yeah, and this is my, so there is a word in Kannada, which it's called ante. So literally translated, it means it seems or apparently. But of course, it is much more than that. It's a place filler. It is, it could mean he, she, they said, or it could be reported speech, or it could mean that's how it is. So it means a whole host of things. And so when I was working on the last translation, I've had editors talk about how, and I usually translate it as something, and it seems. So ante is how I translate ante as it seems. So I've had editors tell me that it is not proper English, that it doesn't read read correctly when you read it on the page. But that's the thing, isn't it? When you say you're translating one culture from the other, I don't want to translate something to sound like it was written by a native English speaker. And in fact, last night I was thinking about how it's almost like having an accent.
Right.
Because when you have an accent, you know that the speaker knows another language, and you don't want, and when you translate with an accent, so to speak, you know that this text comes from another language. So I think those things are also something that we as readers or as editors should sort of keep in mind as well.
Yeah,
to
definitely.
have these accents.
That's a wonderful way of putting it, and it kind of brings me nicely onto Garfield's work, because we're talking about a different kind of way of translating now, not from two languages, but from a way of being in a way. So you took part in the project Language is a Queer Thing, and you're a poet, you're a podcaster, and an interdisciplinary artist. So can you talk to us a little bit about your writing process? How did you begin as a poet, and what are the challenges that your work has helped you to overcome?
Gosh, that's a very complicated question, actually.
You have 1 minute.
Yeah, I'll try to fit in everything. So it's a very disjointed process. It involves delving deep into your heart, into things that have inspired you, things that have caused you hurt, your depression. My poems and my work delve deep into that, and that was a phenomenal part of the poems that I wrote for Language is a Queer Thing, which was a collaboration by the British Council and the Queer Muslim Project. There were 6 poets working for it. Sanah's here, there was me, there was Megha Harish, Amani Saeed, Ife Grillo, and Anil Pradhan. There was a lot of linguistic adventure happening over there, and we drew from our queer experiences. We spoke to our hearts, so to say, and what we came up, though I say so myself, is quite a labor of love and our yearning to say what we are in the most honest language that can be possible. So we kind of translated what we went through onto the page for the reader over there.
Would you give us a taste of the work, please?
Oh yes, definitely. So I'm going to stand over there. It will feel like I'm reading the epistle in church, but yeah, please bear with me. So, can you hear me? Yeah. So, this is a poem called 2012. This was written by me to encapsulate the time when I was kind of questioning my faith and my sexual orientation. I had indulged in prayer to kind of find answers and see whether I could be cured, so to say, in a manner of speaking. Of course, in retrospect, that sounds absolutely stupid and fantastically fantastical. But yeah, that's how you find yourself, so to say. So here goes. 2012. It was a year I said to myself, I'll take a job in a remote city and start life anew. By that, I didn't mean I'd live in a thatched hut, draw water from the well, and coax the cows to move. No, sir. I wanted what you'd know as erasure. a complete evaporation of all memory, of all the he-hens I danced to it, of all the asses that travelled on, and of course, of all the ones who owned all of that. You see, I'd all figured out. Erasure to me was supremely simple, almost like following the numerous rinse and repeats and the numerous steps of a very ordinary recipe. All you have to do is first call on Father and ask him to send you some bread daily. Then say hello to a body by the name of Mary. Do it the old-fashioned way. Hail Mary, I believe is how it's done. Then tell her she's graceful and all of that. And repeat the whole thing 10 times or so. Then go back to calling on Father. This time tell him what a great guy he is and that you're scared of him and all that. And then help yourself to some divine spirit. And then repeat all of that with a sincere pretense of sincerity 5 times once a day. And if that's getting you nowhere, spruce up the proceedings with a litany of lamentation. Lament about every lap you danced into, rue the balls you threw, and woe betide the ass you rode on. Lament long enough and loud enough for your neighbors to tune out of the telly and tune into you. Lament as if your life depends upon it. Yell, why me? Why me, Lord? What have I ever done? Even if what you've done seems to be right to you. Remember, and this is very important, to stir it all at the appropriate decibel. The louder, the better the chances that what you have done will start to seem wrong. And then, every Friday, mix it all in a frying pan, blessed with some olive oil. Light a consecrated fire and scream it all to a blood-curdling boil. And voila, all the ingredients will leap into the air as if you've pinched their bottoms and disappear. And an electronic voice, fed on a diet of zeros and ones, will exclaim, "Erasure complete." Well, needless to say, I'm happy to report that the recipe was a runaway success. In the end, something did disappear. For after all those blasted years, I'm here, I'm very much queer, and well, I've gotten used to it.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to hear you read. And you said, as we've heard, that your work is highly personal, almost therapy. It's a form of transferring and translating your queerness onto the page. But how do you decide what to give and what to withhold? How do you keep yourself safe when things feel so raw?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question, Preti. That, really, again, is a loaded question. So the thing is, I can illustrate that. So while I was writing for this particular project, there were several poems that came out of my life. Poems about domestic abuse, poems about me coming out, poems about heartbreak, etc. So there was this poem I wrote which had domestic abuse painted all over it. And I was not quite sure whether I wanted to tell it the way it was, tell it as it is. I know many poets do that. Sharon Olds does it that way. She tells it as it is, and it's very raw and from the heart. But I was not quite sure I would like to tell it that way. So I kind of colored it with, metaphors and euphemisms and all that stuff. And then when I was paired with Sanah, whom you see over there. So Sanah and I had this discussion, and Sanah was like, why don't you just go ahead and tell it the way it is, really? I was not quite sure I wanted to do that, so I did that. And I said, okay, fine, I'll just go ahead, take a chance, and kind of put it out there in the world. But then when push came to shove, because I had written a number of poems and they had to select a few, I dropped that poem. Because of the fact that it was so joined to the hip to me, I realized I couldn't put a distance between myself and the work that I was working with. So I kind of let it go. So the acid test is, if you're willing to keep distance between yourself and the work that you're doing, and you're okay with it being let out into the world and being interpreted and misinterpreted as well, because it might be misinterpreted for all you care, then it should be okay. Otherwise, wait. Your time will come. You will be able to let go.
Thank you so much. It's really
Thank
powerful to hear you. Now, we're very happy to be able to welcome Sanah Ahsan as well, and she's on screen. Sanah, we're so sorry you can't be here. But before we just get to your reading, I just would like you to talk us through why that is. I mean, it's such a shame, but it's even more powerful that we can get you here anyway in some form.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. No, it's, I'm extremely grateful to be here, even through this medium. But of course, feel a real deep sadness that I guess my Pakistaniness has become a barrier to travel and, has constricted free movement. I think I feel a deep sadness, especially because that land has such deep significance in my lineage. My nani was born in Kanpur and was displaced during the partition. And I'm not able to thus far, come there. And obviously have a deep longing to be there all with you in person. My poetry collection is coming out with Bloomsbury in India too, and I would love to eventually, hopefully, be able to be there with you all in person one day. But I think it's important for me also to acknowledge that I have a huge amount of privilege, being a British citizen and the colonial power that comes with that. And I've been, privileged with free movement for most of my life. And I think all it is a reminder of the violence of bordered logic, and how it really creates so much brutality across the world, from detention to homelessness, and at its most extreme, murder.
Sanah, your work really engages with these subjects, but in such a beautiful, loving and compassionate way. Would you read for us a little bit of the poems, maybe one or two, please?
Sure. Sure, so I'll start with a poem called Stuck. And this is a poem in my collection. I made a mosque in the mouth of a white girl when I was 17. To worship her. Already familiar with the violent silences, absences that come after prayer. I snuck past her sleeping mother, clambered a black pipe and crawled through an awning window, prostrated onto her skin as if it were a velveteen janamaz. And when she stopped leaving the window unbolted, I'd stare at the mihrab of her pale back through the only hole in the stockade fence. My left eyeball, I walk around an empty socket. Have I got time to read one more really quickly?
Sure.
Yeah. So this is called Jummah, it means Friday, and which is a really significant holy day for Muslims. Although I have not covered my head, nor touched free flying hairs, Friday comes to me like it did back then, God's kiss on my tiny forehead. My lover puts her lips on my bare temple, whispers, Jummah Mubarak. Before playing Omar Hisham's Surah Al-Qaf, his voice pools around our ivy-walled cave like the smoke from the Palo Santo sticks she circles. We take turns to do wudu, rushing 3 rounds of rivers over familiar routes. Our water meets at the bottom of a tiny paint-stained sink. With still wet feet, we lay the janamaz horizontal, wide enough to hold us both. Shoulder to shoulder, we are 2 sundered suns, kneeling into the horizon's holy mouth.
Thank you so much, Sanah. I'm sure you'll all agree it's incredibly moving to hear these poets and these writers read their work. Sanah, your poems seem to live and breathe at the intersection of love for the divine and physical desire. So they have queerness in them, they have bodies in them, they have faith in them. Can you talk about your formal methods and intentions in making that space and exploring it? How do you go about constructing it on the page?
Sure, thanks, Preti. I think so often religion is seen as like opposite to sex. And so for me, it's a device to blur those lines. And in my collection, I'm really exploring the meeting place of queerness and Islam. And I think as a device and the form of poetry, I think because of its fragmented nature, it can really hold that blurry space of, for example, the place where, God ends and maybe the lover begins, or where worship becomes sex and vice versa. And that's a really interesting place for me to play with, not just only as a queer person, but I think using that medium of poetry to refuse binaries, right? And I think occupying that grey in poetry is also a means to disrupt singularity. I think that you know, I guess ideas like that come through Islam, there's often an imposition of a very an idea of a monolithic Islam, and we know that the tyrannical road is paved with singularity rather than plurality. And so for me, poetry is a means to bring back that plurality. And there's 1.6 billion Muslims in the world, and yet we are told that Islam is often one that excludes queerness. And it's a really conscious choice for me in my poetry to then bring in the Quranic text, with my queer body, with my hairy body, a body that's often deemed as sinful, to touch something that's seen as holy and untouchable, and for, all of that to be encompassed within a holiness. And I really try to do that with the poems as a device to imagine new worlds, where, for example, me and my lover are having a feast with the Prophet, peace be upon him, and Khadija, where we might be able to experience and imagine a more liberated, more loving place. And that's really an interesting place to explore, I think, with the poems. And I think also because poetry as a device refuses the rigidity that I think sometimes prose does, where the whole sentence needs to make sense from beginning to end of a full stop, whereas I think there's much more ambiguity and complexity that can be held in the poetic form.
Thank you so much for that very rich answer. We have a few minutes for audience questions. If you do have a question, please put your hand up high, make it a question, not a comment, and allow it to be short so that others can also ask. Okay, so there's a lady with a beautiful bracelet whose arm is high, I can see. Please wait for the mic.
Hello. Yeah, first of all, it was a very enriching session, and I'm really sorry that our friend couldn't be here, but as in translation and translators help us transcend boundaries, and sort of my question is along those lines. We see when a translation is done from dense languages into English, like Assamese or any other Indian language for that matter, we see there is every word for every shade of emotion, and English is, in its sense, is not so expansive. We see there are a lot of cultural contexts. So I am basically questioning the task of a translator. How do you sort of encapsulate the essence of the work that it can be understood by someone who doesn't understand the cultural context, someone in the West or someone who doesn't know about, someone unknown about the history, the culture? So this is my question.
Great question.
Thank you for your question. Actually, I'm not a translator, but I have been engaged in this process of how my story, or like me, many other stories are translated to English, and it's not an easy process, as you have mentioned. Yeah, it's even Deepa is also said that translation is not only the word or language to language, but it is also culture to culture. Okay, so that is the process. That's why I think in the workshop that I attended, so we sit together with the translators, and we have to explain what are the elements or the main essence of the story to the translator, and then translator tries to write down that story or translate that story, and they also shared us their draft, and then again there's an editor who helps the translators so that these kind of essence can be carried on from the original story to the to English. So sometimes, for example, if you see in case of Assamese language, for example, there's a word called riha. Riha is a particular particular cloth which is wear during some spiritual moment, and especially during the marriage process. So when translator wants to translate that word, the actual meaning will not be I mean, it's not meaningful in the English language. So it's very difficult to maintain that process. But this is not impossible, because I feel that language does not have any border. Like Sanah mentioned, language does not have any border. So if, as an Assamese writer, if I want to, if I want to carry on the stories to the global readership, then obviously there's a big demand of translation of the local languages, especially the languages like the tribal languages which are located in different parts of India or in different states of Northeast India. So I think, yeah, that is my experience because I'm not a translator. Yeah, Deepa.
Um, I think, I mean, as much as I love geeking out on translation and how we make these choices, I think it'll also be very interesting if we look at it from a different perspective and not always think about what was lost in translation, because it'll never read like when I translate from Kannada to English, what I translate will never read like how it sounded in Kannada. But I think some of the tools that we can sort of use is to, just keep some of these words intact. Like I was mentioning ante. So if we start using these very, very cultural, words which have a very cultural context and all that, so it's just kind of carrying a little bit of the essence. It will never read like a Kannada text. I will never translate like the way Banu Mushtaq wrote her stories. But you use these small little, maybe words or phrases which kind of give you a sense of what it must have sounded like in the original language, even if you don't necessarily know that original language. I think that's just one of the tools that we could use.
That's a really great one. Any other questions? Yes, man at the back, very high hand, yeah.
When you all take poetic liberties to blur the lines between the binaries, how much of the English language is a restriction or a constriction of what you really want to say compared to, let's say, Farsi, where the binaries are not so distinct?
Sanah, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Would you like
yeah,
to?
I mean, sure. No, thank you for that question. I think for me, being born and raised in the UK, English has, in many ways, been the language that I guess that feels most familiar and more comfortable to me. Now, Urdu was used in my household growing up, and what I've done in the collection is really drawn on Urdu terms in moments in the collection to try to communicate things that can't quite be grasped in the English language. But I think just building on some of the conversations that have already been said about the limits of translation, I think that, the underpinning politic of translation is that can we invite the reader to step into our experience by, altering language or changing language in a way that really caters to their understanding? And I think it really invites us into questioning, the limits of empathy. I think we assume that if we can translate enough, then someone will fully feel that experience. And I question that actually as to whether we ever really can fully come into another's experience. And I'm more interested in how we can sit at the edges of not knowing and still feel a sense of connectedness, because I think, there's many authors, many writers who have talked about the precarious nature of empathy and there being a certain kind of violence that's required in stepping into another person's shoes, that requires them to step out of their shoes, right, as the only means of connection. And actually, what if there could still be a sense of connectedness without fully knowing? Those are the places that I'm more interested in exploring.
Do you want to add something to that, Garfield, about language and binaries and breaking down borders?
Well, I would say just don't bother about the language. Say what is in your mind and be free about it. Be very open about it. The moment you look to restrictions, you'll kind of cage yourself in and not express what is in your mind, actually. Keep them all aside. That will come later. Probably your editor will take a look at it and all that stuff. Yeah, don't worry about that, really.
So there's a fearlessness in these translations. We only have a few seconds left. Does anyone have a very short question? Yes, there's a lady at the back with a white sleeve.
It's not super short, but if it's all right,
You have
can I just...
literally 30 seconds. Sorry.
Okay, okay. So my question was just, I really liked how both of Sanah and Garfield's works were really physical, and there was a great deal of materiality to how you had written your work. So my question was just, how do you put that on a page without transgressing into possibly being blasphemic, considering the fact that we're all queer Muslim poets? Because it's such a concern to not transgress, but to be able to depict that sort of divine physicality that does kind of, find its way into queer love while being Muslim.
Such a wonderful question, thank you. Yeah, Sanah, we're going to call on you first.
Okay, sure. I'll try and keep it brief. Thank you. It's a gorgeous question. I think it really requires a consciousness and a care. And I think I'm only speaking from my personal experience, because, there are realities that we have to work with as writers, that there are going to be, to some extent, implications for how we bring in the body into the work, how we bring in text that is so often seen as holy and untouchable. But I think that there's something that's also very necessary and urgent about doing that, because, we know that there are so many queer Muslims out there that are literally killing themselves because they cannot imagine the coexistence of something so central like the Quran and their own body to come together, right? So for me, it was a really conscious decision to bring the body, especially into my writing. And I think there's something as well about, the holy nature of the body, to be able to worship one's body, and that to be an element of prayer. And so I think there's so much about religion that we're taught that is rooted in patriarchy and rooted in the ideas of man, that we really need to disrupt, and is actually missing. I mean, it's definitely in the archives in Sufi poetry, we know that, but it's not necessarily central to current poetry and contemporary poetry. It's really a missing voice. And so for me, that was a really conscious decision to do, and to bring in like the body and the Quran and bring that in together.
I'm just so overwhelmed with the courage and the openness of our writers, and for you all for listening so patiently and giving their work a safe space for it to be expressed. Thank you so much to PEN and to the British Council for bringing this work into publication, supporting these important voices. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening.